Skies of Fire. Chapter 9. Squadron Life. Life at Petit Synthe settled into patterns that balanced the extreme tensions of combat with the mundane rhythms of military existence. Days structured around operational requirements, briefings, patrols, maintenance, debriefings, provided the framework within which squadron life developed its particular character. A culture shaped by shared experience and common purpose, despite the diverse backgrounds of its participants. The squadron operated essentially as a self-contained community. Its approximately 25 pilots supported by nearly 100 ground personnel, mechanics, armorers, riggers, intelligence staff, administrative clerks, cooks, and various specialists, all focused on maintaining effective aerial operations. This community developed its own traditions, hierarchies, and social structures independent of, though still connected to, the broader military organization. Our living quarters, while basic, provided relative comfort compared to the conditions endured by infantry soldiers in the trenches. Each pilot had a private room in one of several wooden buildings arranged near the officers' mess. The structures weatherproofed and heated sufficiently for moderate comfort, even during colder periods. Furnishings remained minimal: bed, desk, chair, storage for personal belongings, but allowed for individual personalization within military constraints. My own quarters gradually accumulated the artifacts of frontline service: maps annotated with observations from patrols, technical manuals dog-eared from frequent reference, photographs from home pinned alongside images of squadron aircraft, small souvenirs collected during brief leaves in nearby communities. The space became personal territory amid the communal environment of military operations, a place for private reflection between the intensely shared experiences of combat flying. The officers' mess served as the social center of squadron life, a large wooden building divided into dining area, sitting room, and bar, where pilots gathered for meals, relaxation, and the conversations that constituted an essential aspect of our shared existence. Meals provided the most consistent social interaction, the entire squadron assembling according to established schedules, regardless of individual preferences or interests. Breakfast typically featured minimal conversation. Most pilots focused on the coming day's operations, reviewing maps or tactical materials, while consuming the substantial meals necessary to support high-altitude flying in open cockpits. The fare itself remained surprisingly good despite wartime restrictions, with eggs, bacon, bread, and coffee available most mornings, thanks to the squadron's proximity to agricultural areas and its status as a combat unit. Your ration allocation increases proportionally with altitude, Major Bishop once explained, when a visiting staff officer commented on the generous portions. Scientific studies demonstrate the caloric requirements for sustained, high-altitude operations. We're merely following medical guidance. Whether this represented actual policy or Bishop's creative interpretation to ensure his pilots received adequate nutrition remained unclear, but the practical result was appreciated regardless. Proper feeding constituted an essential element of combat effectiveness in the physically demanding environment of early aviation. Dinner established the fullest expression of squadron social life, operations typically concluding before darkness, allowing the entire pilot complement to gather for the day's most substantial meal and subsequent evening activities. The food, while still reflecting wartime limitations, represented the best the squadron's resourceful cooks could provide with available ingredients. More significant than the cuisine was the social environment that developed around these shared meals. The particular culture of an operational fighter squadron, expressed through conversation, behavior, and the unspoken understandings that developed among men regularly risking their lives together. Notice how the seating arranges itself, MacDonald observed during my second week at Petit Synthe. Flight commanders at the head table with the major, then pilots grouped primarily by flight assignment, with some adjustment for personal affinity. Natural hierarchy establishing itself through environmental adaptation. His analytical approach to social dynamics reflected his academic background. A former anthropology student who now applied observational skills to the particular tribal structure of a combat aviation unit. His observations proved generally accurate. The mess seating established visible patterns that reflected both formal organization and informal relationships. Conversation during meals followed unwritten but understood protocols. Operational matters discussed openly, but without unnecessary dwelling on dangers faced. Personal backgrounds shared selectively, rather than comprehensively. Humor, employed frequently, but with sensitivity to individual circumstances. Political discussions remained surprisingly nuanced. Aviation matters dominated technical conversations, and occasional philosophical explorations emerged during quieter evenings. The unique aspect of our community, observed Captain Horn during one such discussion, is the combination of extreme danger with substantial privilege. We risk death daily, but sleep in proper beds. We face combat regularly, but eat at tables with tablecloths. The infantry would find our accommodations luxurious, while considering our casualty rates horrifying. This paradox characterized much of squadron life. The contrast between the deadly serious nature of our primary purpose and the relatively comfortable conditions in which we lived between combat missions. The contradiction generated both appreciation for our circumstances relative to other military assignments and a particular form of guilt that surfaced occasionally in quiet conversations. Sometimes I feel almost fraudulent, admitted a British lieutenant named Harrison during one late evening discussion. After a patrol, I return to clean sheets and hot meals, while men in the trenches continue living in mud and squalor. The disparity seems unjustifiable despite the different nature of our contributions. Such reflections emerged periodically, particularly after difficult operations, or when ground fighting intensified in our sector. The responses from more experienced pilots typically emphasized the specific requirements of aviation operations rather than comparative suffering or contribution. Different weapons require different maintenance, Major Bishop stated simply when such concerns were raised. Artillery requires appropriate housing for continued effectiveness. Tanks require specialized support facilities. Aircraft require rested, well-fed pilots capable of maximum mental acuity. It's not privilege. It's operational necessity. His practical framing, while technically accurate, didn't entirely resolve the emotional aspect of the disparity. The awareness that our experience of the war differed substantially from that of most combatants despite sharing the same fundamental dangers. Beyond meals, the mess supported various evening activities that constituted the primary entertainment and relaxation available between operations. Card games occupied many pilots. Bridge, poker, and other variations providing both diversion and modest financial exchanges that added interest without creating significant conflicts. Chess attracted others. The strategic thinking required serving as either complement or counterbalance to tactical flying, depending on individual perspective. A battered piano stood in one corner of the sitting room, periodically employed by those with musical inclination. Lieutenant Rawlings played classical pieces with professional-level skill, while others contributed popular songs ranging from music hall numbers to newer jazz compositions, filtering into military consciousness. Occasional impromptu concerts developed when sufficient talent and enthusiasm coincided, providing welcome distraction from operational pressures. Reading occupied many during quieter periods, newspapers and magazines providing connection to broader developments, despite being days or weeks outdated by the time they reached us. Books offering more substantial escape into different mental territories. The squadron maintained an informal library through collective contribution, volumes circulating among interested readers without formal tracking or limitations. Letter writing constituted another common evening activity, maintaining connections with family, friends, and romantic interests, despite the geographical and experiential distance that separated combat aviators from civilian life. The content of these communications necessarily involved careful editing, operational details omitted for security reasons, dangers minimized to avoid causing anxiety, daily experiences translated into terms comprehensible to those without direct exposure to our realities. My own letters home maintained this delicate balance, providing sufficient information to demonstrate continued well-being without including details that might generate unnecessary concern. I described the French countryside, the historical sites visible during flights, the international composition of the squadron, while omitting specific combat accounts, casualty information, or the psychological impacts of frontline service. "It's not deception exactly," Captain Horn observed, when this common practice was discussed during one evening conversation. "It's translation between incompatible experiential languages. They cannot comprehend our reality without direct exposure. We cannot fully explain it without causing disproportionate distress. The compromise serves necessary psychological purposes for both parties." This practical negotiation of psychological terrain extended to our interactions within the squadron as well, particularly regarding the ever-present reality of casualty risk. Every pilot understood that each mission carried potential for death or injury, yet productive functioning required managing this awareness without denying its existence or becoming paralyzed by its implications. The squadron developed specific cultural mechanisms for this purpose: linguistic patterns, behavioral protocols, and shared understandings that maintained operational effectiveness while accommodating the psychological realities of combat flying. Certain topics remained effectively off-limits in general conversation. Others were addressed only through specific linguistic frameworks that provided emotional distance without complete denial. Losses received acknowledgement without elaborate ceremony. A pilot's absence noted factually rather than emotionally. Personal effects packed and forwarded according to established procedures. Minimal disruption to operational schedules. Permitted despite the human impact. This approach might have appeared callous to outside observers, but functioned as essential psychological management within the operational environment. "We cannot afford the luxury of full mourning for each loss," Major Bishop explained, after my first experience of a squadron casualty. A British pilot shot down during a patrol north of Ypres. The operational tempo must continue regardless of individual circumstances. Respect is demonstrated through mission accomplishment rather than visible grief. This philosophy permeated squadron culture. The understanding that continued effective functioning constituted the most meaningful response to losses, rather than elaborate expressions of emotion that might compromise operational capability. It didn't prevent private processing or individual relationships, but established parameters for collective response that maintained combat effectiveness. The bar area of the mess provided another essential element of squadron life: controlled access to alcohol that served both social and psychological functions within the combat environment. Unlike some military units that prohibited or severely restricted drinking, 85 Squadron maintained a well-stocked bar available to pilots during evening hours, with unwritten but generally observed limitations governing consumption. Notice the patterns, MacDonald suggested during my early days at Petit Synthe. No drinking before flying, or when scheduled for early patrol the following day. Moderate consumption most evenings, with occasional exceptions following particularly difficult operations or significant losses. Self-regulation within understood parameters rather than imposed restrictions. The observation proved accurate. Most pilots maintained disciplined approaches to alcohol despite its availability, recognizing the operational implications of impairment, while acknowledging the psychological benefits of moderate consumption in a high-stress environment. Occasional excesses occurred, but rarely interfered with operational responsibilities. The peer enforcement of standards generally proving more effective than official regulations might have been. Squadron drinking culture included specific traditions that structured consumption and reinforced group cohesion. Toasts acknowledging achievements or commemorating fallen comrades. Drinking games that combined entertainment with controlled intake. Celebratory practices following successful missions or milestone accomplishments. These rituals provided psychological structure while maintaining operational functionality, balancing the contradictory requirements of combat aviation. My first significant encounter with this aspect of squadron culture occurred after my 5th victory, when several pilots organized an informal recognition of my ace status, despite the general de-emphasis of individual achievements. Captain Horn initiated the proceedings during dinner, standing to address the assembled officers with characteristic economy of expression. "Attention, gentlemen. Lieutenant Marshall has achieved his 5th confirmed victory. Squadron tradition requires appropriate acknowledgement." The announcement triggered an established protocol: pilots moving to the bar area after dinner, arranging themselves according to an apparently predetermined pattern, producing a bottle reserved for such occasions. I found myself directed to a central position, unsure of the expected participation, but following the group's guidance. Horn presented a glass containing amber liquid. Traditional observance involves consumption of this particular whisky, a specific single malt selected for such occasions, followed by brief acknowledgement of those who contributed to your development as a combat pilot. The ritual balances recognition with perspective, achievement with humility. The ceremony proceeded according to this framework. I consumed the provided drink, of exceptional quality despite wartime supply challenges, then acknowledged those who had shaped my development from trainee to combat pilot. The assembled officers responded with appropriate recognition, followed by general conversation and standard evening activities. The ceremony complete without excessive elaboration. Beyond the structured environments of operations and mess life, squadron social dynamics extended into various informal configurations. Small groups formed according to shared interests, compatible personalities, or circumstantial associations. These groupings established additional support structures within the larger organization, providing more personal connections amid the professional relationships that dominated official interactions. I found myself gradually integrated into several such informal associations. A regular bridge group that included MacDonald, Harrison, and a Canadian lieutenant named Inglis. Occasional excursions to local communities with Horn and 2 other pilots, when operational schedules permitted. Technical discussions with mechanically inclined officers interested in aircraft performance optimization. These informal connections provided essential psychological support amid the stresses of combat operations, opportunities for relaxation, personal expression, and human connection beyond the professional requirements of squadron duties. They developed organically rather than through official arrangement, reflecting natural social patterns rather than imposed structures. Physical maintenance occupied another significant portion of squadron life, both aircraft and human bodies, requiring regular attention to sustain operational effectiveness. Aircraft maintenance dominated the technical side of operations. Riggers, mechanics, and armorers working continuously to keep the SE-5s in optimal condition, despite the rigors of combat flying and exposure to environmental challenges. Each pilot maintained a particular relationship with the ground crew assigned to his aircraft, a partnership essential to combat effectiveness and survival. I developed significant respect for Sergeant Morse, the chief mechanic responsible for my SE-5, whose expertise and dedication directly impacted my operational capability and personal safety. Aircraft responds to individual handling characteristics, Morris explained early in our working relationship. I adjust control surfaces and engine timing to your specific flying style based on observations and feedback. The machine becomes personalized to your requirements, rather than maintained to generic specifications. This customization process enhanced both performance and confidence. Knowing that my aircraft had been optimized for my particular flying approach provided technical advantage and psychological reassurance during combat operations. Similar relationships developed between other pilots and their assigned ground personnel, creating a network of specialized partnerships that maximized squadron effectiveness. Human physical maintenance received similar attention. Flying at high altitude in open cockpits imposed significant physiological demands that required proper countermeasures to sustain operational capability. Regular physical exercise formed part of the squadron routine, informal but expected participation in activities ranging from football matches to cross-country running, depending on weather conditions and personal preferences. Weather dominated operational planning and scheduling, introducing an element of unpredictability into squadron life, despite the generally structured military environment. Flying conditions determined patrol possibilities, training opportunities, and maintenance activities, creating a rhythm dictated more by meteorological patterns than by administrative preferences. Notice how the entire squadron's emotional state correlates with barometric pressure, MacDonald noted during a particularly extended period of poor flying conditions. Collective mood declines as operational inactivity increases, regardless of the relative comfort such inactivity might theoretically provide. We're fundamentally oriented toward action, despite its associated dangers. The observation highlighted an essential aspect of fighter pilot psychology: the preference for active engagement, despite risks, rather than passive safety without purpose. Extended weather-related groundings generated more psychological stress for many pilots than continuous operations might have. The forced inactivity creating tension rather than relief. Intelligence briefings provided another fundamental element of squadron life: detailed information about enemy capabilities, dispositions, and recent activities forming the foundation for operational planning and tactical decision-making. These briefings occurred both formally, scheduled sessions before patrols, and informally through continuous updates and observations shared among pilots and intelligence staff. The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Howard, maintained comprehensive documentation of German air operations in our sector. Aircraft types observed, tactical patterns identified, individual enemy pilots recognized through distinctive markings or flying styles. This information proved invaluable in operational planning, allowing anticipation of likely enemy responses to our activities and identification of favorable engagement opportunities. The war in the air has evolved beyond random encounters, Howard explained during one detailed briefing session. Both sides maintain systematic observation of the other's patterns, developing countermeasures to identify tactical approaches, adapting equipment and techniques based on observed effectiveness. Your observations during patrols contribute directly to this evolving understanding. This systematic approach to aerial warfare represented significant evolution from earlier periods, when individual prowess dominated outcomes more than collective intelligence and coordinated tactics. By 1918, both Allied and German air services operated with sophisticated understanding of the other's capabilities, generating a complex competitive environment that rewarded systematic analysis as much as individual flying skill. Leadership within this complex environment required particular qualities: technical competence and tactical judgment forming necessary foundations, while psychological insight and interpersonal skill determined effectiveness in maintaining squadron functionality amid constant stress and periodic losses. Major Bishop and Captain Horn exemplified these qualities through different but complementary approaches, their combined influence shaping squadron culture and operational effectiveness. Bishop's leadership emphasized clarity of purpose, precision of execution, and professional focus, clear objectives established, specific standards maintained, individual development directed toward collective capability. His approach balanced operational aggressiveness with tactical discipline, risk acceptance with calculated judgment, individual initiative with coordinated action. Horn's leadership as flight commander complemented Bishop's squadron direction. Greater tactical specificity, balanced by closer interpersonal connection, more detailed technical guidance, accompanied by more individualized development approaches. His influence operated at smaller unit scale, but with greater personal impact, shaping individual pilot capabilities that collectively determined mission outcomes. He observes your particular strengths and vulnerabilities, Harrison explained after my first weeks in a flight, then structures guidance and assignments to develop capabilities while managing limitations. The approach appears individually tailored, but actually follows systematic methodology, identifying critical capabilities necessary for survival, then ensuring each pilot develops those capabilities through appropriate experiences. This developmental focus characterized Horn's leadership generally. Each patrol, each engagement, each debriefing, structured to enhance capabilities through guided experience rather than merely accomplish immediate objectives. The approach generated continuous improvement across the flight, building collective capability through systematic individual development within the operational environment. Mail from home provided another significant element of squadron life. Connections to previous existence and personal identity separate from military roles. Maintaining relationships despite physical separation and experiential divergence. Letters arrived irregularly due to wartime transportation challenges, often grouped in batches that created periodic rather than continuous connection with distant correspondents. Communications with Cal provided different opportunities, shared training experiences, and parallel combat service, allowing more direct discussion of current realities, without the translation requirements that family correspondence demanded. His letters from his Camel Squadron described operational patterns similar to our own, despite different aircraft types and tactical approaches, confirming the general consistency of fighter operations across various units despite local variations. "The Camel tries to kill me daily," he wrote in one characteristic passage, "but provides excellent service against the Hun when it's not attempting to assassinate its pilot. Our operational tempo mirrors yours. Regular patrols interspersed with occasional intense engagements, weather determining schedules more than administrative preference, tactical approaches evolving continuously based on enemy adaptations." Similar value emerged from periodic communication with Springs, whose Dolphin Squadron operated in a different sector, but confronted comparable operational realities. His letters combined tactical observations with philosophical reflections characteristic of his particular perspective, practical flying insights alongside broader contemplation of the war's nature and purposes. "The Dolphin presents interesting contradictions," he wrote after several months with his squadron. "Excellent visibility forward and above due to the head-through center section arrangement, but potentially lethal in crashes due to the same design feature. Superior performance at altitude compared to most German types, but demanding in terms of pilot technique during aerobatic maneuvers. The metaphorical implications seem appropriately representative of our general circumstances." His tendency toward philosophical framing provided useful counterpoint to the intensely practical focus that dominated daily squadron operations, occasional reminder of broader contexts and meanings beyond immediate tactical concerns. As spring advanced toward summer in 1918, this established pattern of squadron life continued its effective functioning, despite increasing operational pressures associated with German offensives elsewhere along the Western Front. Our sector remained relatively stable in terms of ground operations, but aerial activity intensified as both sides sought information and advantage through increased reconnaissance and fighter operations. 85 Squadron maintained its operational rhythm throughout this period. Regular patrols, planned interceptions, occasional special missions supporting broader strategic objectives. Combat engagements occurred with increasing frequency as German air activity expanded, providing additional opportunities for effective action while simultaneously increasing risk exposure and psychological pressure. My own combat record continued its gradual development. Additional victories interspersed with inconclusive engagements and occasional missions without significant contact. By early summer, my confirmed tally had reached 8, a respectable but not exceptional record, reflecting consistent contribution rather than spectacular but unsustainable performance. More significant than the numerical count was the comprehensive development of combat capability, improved tactical judgment, enhanced situational awareness, refined technical skills combining into increased overall effectiveness, independent of specific victory tallies. This progression aligned with the squadron's emphasis on sustainable contribution rather than individual achievement, development that supported continued mission accomplishment rather than momentary statistical distinctions. As June established summer conditions across the Western Front, bringing optimal flying weather and corresponding operational intensification, 85 Squadron continued its effective contribution to Allied air efforts in our sector. The established patterns of squadron life, operational, social, psychological, supported this sustained performance despite increasing pressure, providing essential structural stability amid tactical evolution and strategic development. The rhythm continued. Briefings, patrols, maintenance, debriefings, meals, evenings, occasional leave rotations, each element contributing to the comprehensive system that maintained operational capability. Individual pilots rotated through the squadron as casualties, transfers, and new arrivals altered specific personnel composition, without changing the fundamental organizational culture that supported continued effectiveness. Through all these elements and evolutions, squadron life remained the essential foundation of combat capability, the comprehensive environment that enabled sustained performance in circumstances that would otherwise quickly exhaust individual resources. The culture that developed among these diverse men, unified by common purpose, proved as important to mission accomplishment as the aircraft they flew or the tactics they employed, the human system as critical as the technical components in generating effective aerial combat power. We lived, we flew, we fought, together.
Enjoying the story? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new chapter. Episodes drop every week. Be part of the adventure. And if you're hooked, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your support helps keep the story alive.